It appears Donald Trump Jr. has caved to Congress, agreeing to appear for an interview with the Senate Intelligence Committee. This comes after they pressed him with a subpoena, and it comes after at least one Democratic senator publicly said the president's son could face the extraordinary prospect of jail time if he did, in fact, fully defy that subpoena. All of this is new tonight, and it shows that the system in this way is working. The interview is stated to be limited to about a half a dozen topics and has a time limit of about 4 hours. All of this coming hours after the president was trashing the whole idea that this was legitimate.
Why is it unfair for Don Jr. to be subpoenaed if he's pulled out of classified flight? Well, you know, it's really a tough situation because my son spent, I guess, over 20 hours testifying about something that Mueller said was 100% okay. And now they want him to testify again. I don't know why. I have no idea why, but it seems very unfair to me.
No idea why. Always interesting when someone volunteers an extra denial. I don't know anything about that, the president's saying. As for the 100% line, well, that's not quite the case. They did look at whether the Donald Trump Jr. meeting at Trump Tower and the interest and receptivity to receiving information of value potentially from a foreigner could constitute a crime. Now, when you look at this, though, they ultimately decided that the evidence would not be enough to obtain and sustain a conviction. That's what the Mueller report says. Now, the president is entitled to his own views, just not his own facts of what is in the Mueller report. Now, Congress clearly has questions for Don Jr. that it didn't want to sweep under the rug, and it appears they will get these answers in this setting. All of that sets up the next clash between this administration and Congress, because House Democrats are now today setting a formal hearing date for a different Trump-related subpoena, former White House counsel Don McGahn. The hearing now set for a week from today. Democrats say if he does not show, he will be held in contempt.
We've subpoenaed McGahn, and we're expecting him to show up on the 21st. And if he doesn't, he will be subject to contempt.
Now, that's the Judiciary Committee. Then you have Trump lawyers facing questions from another investigative committee, the House Intelligence Committee. This is what they're saying. They're going to look at Trump's lawyers, and they're going to dig into obstruction. They're going to look at whether those lawyers, in their view, helped obstruct the Russia investigation by shaping false testimony after Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, testified that Trump's lawyers helped edit his congressional testimony. Now, again, he is someone who has confessed to misleading Congress. So the big question is whether other people might have been in on that. Intel Chair Adam Schiff ready to issue subpoenas. With all of this drama, though, could be easy to miss the larger headline tonight. So let me tell you what it is. Congressional subpoenas are a very real thing. They can't just be ducked, and that's true even if in a scratch my back, scratch your back type of town like Washington, even if you're the president's son. Now, if Don Jr. could not run out from this subpoena, does former Trump lawyer Don McGahn really think he will be able to? I take that question to my panel, beginning tonight with Maya Wiley, former counsel of the mayor of New York City, and Brittany Cooper, professor at Rutgers University. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
Brittany, I begin with you on the political science of this, which is this is not just about subpoena rules. It's an interbranch clash. What does it tell you as we come on the air tonight that Don Jr. actually buckled in the part of this clash?
You know, what I'm more concerned about is the way that the White House is attempting to bully and subvert our separation of powers and checks and balances process. And so, yes, I'm heartened by the fact that Don Jr. has had to submit to this process. But the fact that the Trump administration is fighting Congress at every level is all about this sort of broader problem of obstruction of justice. The Trump administration believes that they should not be held accountable to the American people, to any levels of government. There are clear indicators and evidence that significant crimes and breaches of protocol have been committed here that need to be investigated. And what should concern us all is what happens if the person who is elected to lead the country says that our processes shouldn't be respected. This undermining of our view of government creates a real crisis of confidence in the country, in addition to this battle battle over whether there's a crisis of constitutionality. I think there absolutely is. And so I'm not as excited about the fact that Don Jr. will testify, because will he do what Lindsey Graham told him to do, which is to invoke the Fifth Amendment, and so then to symbolically cooperate but not actually cooperate?
Well, based on the reporting we have, and it's fluid, it would appear that he's not looking to do that because they negotiated for the hours. In other words, if your plan is to come in and say, I'm now invoking the Fifth, I don't have anything to say, you don't need to negotiate a 4-hour window, right?
I mean, that assumes that everyone is negotiating in good faith. And there's nothing about the way the Trump administration has worked that tells me that they respect this process or think that it's happening in good faith. And so you see the president coming out today saying this is all unfair. That sets up a pretext for not being participatory in ways that are actually going to be effective.
What do you think?
Well, I personally am very excited about the testimony, but that's wearing a legal lens. I actually agree with the constitutional crisis point when you have 20 investigations that this administration is actually obstructing in Congress. I think part of what's happening here is that we're talking about the Senate Intel Committee and Senator Burr, who's actually one of the people who had a back channel to the Trump administration, basically letting them know who the FBI was looking at. I think the issue for Donald Trump Jr., which does raise the question of whether or not he might invoke the Fifth, at least for part of the testimony, there may be categories he wouldn't invoke it for and categories he would. He has made a statement to Congress that he did not have awareness of other foreign governments trying to support the campaign when he had a meeting in August 2016 with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and then there was the conversation that Eric Prince was involved with Israelis. The question then becomes, how is that not perjury? That particular statement, there are other statements he's made where you can raise the question of perjury. That one seems a lot more clear than some of the others where he may be able to say, well, that wasn't an exact lie, it was just a sort of lie.
Right.
So I think that's a real issue for him.
And what do you think is going on with this committee? I mean, Democrats have blasted the Republicans for a range of cooperation or worse with, as you say, the targets of the investigation. The Mueller report clearly decided to nail, so to speak, to nail Burr for that. And yet, this is a situation where they're putting heat on the president's family. And what we just saw, the clip I showed of the president showed, he looked a little out of the loop about what the message was or whether this was going to get solved today. Nothing new there. But what is your theory for why, on this thing of all things, the Republicans are going hard?
Well, I don't know that all the Republicans are going hard.
Burr, in this committee.
But certainly Senator Burr, and I think one of the things we've seen is, on one hand, he has been a party foot soldier in terms of the back channel, but on the other hand, he also clearly did something Devin Nunes did not do, which is try to adhere to some of the norms of Congress and some of the boundaries around credibility of Congress being able to do its job.
And I think you make an important point, which is, I'm not saying let's bake them a whole tray of cookies.
Sure.
Right.
But
maybe half a cookie. In other words, there's got to be some, if we're all dealing with the facts here, there's got to be some, whatever the motivations may be, because I myself have been a little confused about where the Senate committee is on all of this, but there's got to be some notation here that maybe just for their own institutional reasons, they were so frustrated. The account, according to New York Times and elsewhere, was that they were so frustrated with Don Jr. double talking them that eventually they said, okay, the heck with it. That may not be the greatest reason for constitutional oversight, but it is a reason.
And it's a good one in the context of a Congress where you have a partisan fight about whether or not Congress is going to protect its constitutional power. And that should matter to both parties.
I think the reason that I'm so skeptical is that part of what the Trump administration has done is lower the bar on what we think needs to be celebrated or marked as a significant accomplishment. And so I'm just not going to celebrate them for doing what they're supposed to do, which is to comply with subpoenas, to keep your word, to show up and be accountable. Transparency in our government is a hallmark of what makes a democracy work. And when you have an administration who is using its attorneys and using its party power in one branch of of Congress to subvert this entire process when we know that there are real concerns about the integrity of our elections, about the integrity of how the Trump administration has proceeded with regard to Russia, when we see Trump flirting with dictators in meetings all week for the last several days and essentially thumbing his nose at the process and at American values, then I'm not going to celebrate them. But certainly, yes, we should consider it a feather in the cap of Congress that they got Don Jr. to do the right thing.
I'm almost hearing like a parenting level view of constitutional oversight here, that you're like, you're supposed to do your chores. So you have to do more than that in this household. Let me bring in a member of that body. Both of you stay with me. But Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett is on the Powerful Ways and Means Committee, which is a big part of this battle. It was in court today on getting Trump's tax returns. That's the auditing side of this. There's more than one avenue. Good evening to you, sir.
Good to be with you, Ari.
How do you grade what's happening on the Senate side? How important is it that there was this accommodation reached? It would seem that Don Jr. has partially folded. And does that have anything to do with what your body is trying to do to get Don McGahn to come take a seat and tell the truth?
I think it does. As you indicated, refusing a congressional subpoena is a very serious matter. If Congress cannot enforce its subpoenas and do its job of oversight, then we really do have a runaway president that jeopardizes and threatens our democracy and moves us toward tyranny. What we're doing on the tax returns is to enforce a law that is explicit, that uses the word shall, that this administration has ignored. President Trump seems to be on a total obstruction program. No one talks, no one delivers documents. We have to move forward to enforce those subpoenas and ensure accountability, of which this administration has had none. And it recognizes that its Republican enablers here in Congress, there is nothing that President Trump can do or say that will cause them to break their silence unless it's to pat him on the back. So it's our job to assure that accountability.
I think you lay it out very well. And so, Congressman, I want to push you a little bit,
Sure.
not really in disagreement, but in teasing out a certain point. Let's stipulate, as lawyers like to do, that obviously Mr. McGahn has an obligation to comply with his subpoena. He's a White House counsel. He knows that. And so for that reason, he should come testify. But having said that, what do you say to the argument that that's not really the biggest priority for Congress if the bulk of what Mr. McGahn has said in a separate valid proceeding under oath to Mr. Mueller has been laid out? And it's now time for the Congress to decide what, if anything, to do about it rather than what some have called a redo. I want to give you the opportunity to address that tonight.
Well, I think we do need to hear firsthand from him, from Bob Mueller. We need these tax returns to speak for themselves about Trump's background. We need that rather than just a version of that as reported by Barr, and now we have more of the Mueller report, though not all of it. So, yes, it's important to get.
So on that, well, the taxes, of course, we don't have, so that's totally different. But what do you think you might learn, that you might learn from Mr. McGahn that's not in the Mueller report, since you say you might?
I think that Americans would hear, if he testifies candidly, that he was urged to engage in obstruction directly by President Trump. And I think hearing that in his words on national television is much more powerful than just reading it in a report. We need to know about that and to understand the full reach of obstruction and destruction of our democracy that's occurred here.
Maya, could you speak to the congressman's point? I mean, part of what he's saying is, witnesses on the stand make a big difference.
Look, when we have had an attorney general that has woven a narrative around a report that is not consistent with the word of the report, when so many Americans have not read the report, what we need is for folks to pay attention to what it actually said, not the headlines that were driven by essentially a spin. And I think what is so important about what the congressman is saying in this case is that what Robert Mueller essentially says, and it's very clear in one of the footnotes in the report, is this is Congress's responsibility. Right. This is not a criminal proceeding. The question here, and he doesn't use this language exactly, but legally this is the same message, is it's the constitutional purview of Congress to decide whether or not this president has done something that's such an abuse of authority, abuse of power, that Congress should take constitutional action. That is not a criminal proceeding. That is a constitutional proceeding that only Congress can make, which means Congress has to go through the process.
Right. Congressman Brittany and Maya, thanks to each of you. Congressman, appreciate you coming on the beat tonight. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.